Welcome, everybody. It's just about 10 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome Nisha Arekapudi, is our expert in the rule of law and women's access to justice. She joined the UN Women in 2023 to lead the gender and the law portfolio, which aims to mobilize global action to end discrimination against women and accelerate empowerment. Prior to this, Nisha was with the World Bank Group's Women, Business, and Law team for 8 years, where she led the project's Going to Court Indicator, examining justice institutions and procedures that enhance women's access to the legal system. And Nisha is our keynote speaker today, and I'd like to welcome her up today. So please thank you, Nisha, for coming out.
Thank you so much. What an honor it is to be here with you all in the birthplace of women's rights in the United States. For so much of our history, women were mere property, objects that belonged to their fathers or husbands without any legal identity or liberties of their own. Around the world, most were prevented from working without permission or seeking a formal education. They had little to no control over finances, land, even their own bodies, and they did not have the ability to vote. But all people are born free and with certain inalienable rights, including the right to revolution. In 1776, Abigail Adams wrote in a letter to her husband that if particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion. We will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. Our rebellion is centuries old, yet it continues today. How much progress have we achieved, and how much work remains? The first inklings date back to 400 BC, when Agnotis defied norms to become the first female to practice medicine, and the law prohibiting women's work as physicians in Athens was revoked. In 1691, Juana Inés de la Cruz passionately advocated for women's right to education in Mexico, entering a convent to earn one herself and challenging the law as devoid of reason. These women understood that law is the foundational first step toward meaningful recognition and participation in society. It ensures human rights, provides guidelines as to what is and is not acceptable, protects safety, and regulates conduct. Laws can reflect social norms, core beliefs that have been inscribed as rule, but they can also change them, planting the seeds for attitude shifts by prescribing values that reflect the ideals of free and fair societies. Laws also outline civic responsibilities, ensuring that people uphold and respect democratic standards in exchange for a shared community. This is a social contract that everyone is a party to, regardless of characteristic or circumstance. And that's why 1848 really marked a watershed moment for women's rights with the Seneca Falls Convention here. Activists publicly petitioned for their legal, civil, and political rights. It was not the first time that women's rights were discussed in American society, nor was it the only fight for women's rights during that time. It was, however, a decisive and pivotal moment, the beginning of a movement in the United States and abroad that began to grow rapidly. In 1893, women in New Zealand sent a message to other activists across the world that equal voting rights were achievable through advocacy. This was the outcome of years of traveling to towns across the country, giving speeches, lectures, and countless petitions presented to both houses of parliament. Maori women were at the forefront of this movement, teaching us an important lesson about how much stronger advocacy can be when it is inclusive and united. Congratulations poured in from suffragists around the world, with one writing that the victory gave new hope and life to all women struggling for emancipation. By the time we get to the 20th century, women around the world are mobilizing in ever greater numbers to campaign for gender equality. They are finally gaining the right to vote. The first International Women's Day is celebrated in Europe. The All India Women's Conference convenes for the first time, and Japan's women's movement finds a leader. The Aba Women's War in Nigeria brings thousands to protest undemocratically appointed chiefs by publicly shaming and sitting on them, eventually forcing them to resign and drop egregious tax impositions on women. This is just as women's role in the labor force is rapidly evolving by opening up options beyond caretaking roles. So often, it takes a perfect storm of circumstances for things to really change. And in this case, the devastation of 2 world wars led to striking social and industrial developments. Not only were human rights suddenly top of mind, but women were also increasingly allowed to enter the formal labor force as employees and entrepreneurs. As the number of working women grew, it was clear that global prosperity and women's economic participation are inextricably linked. Their empowerment is directly correlated with countries' ability to govern effectively, reduce poverty, and grow sustainably. In 1945, the United Nations was formed, and Eleanor Roosevelt oversees the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. For all the world to hear, she and other advocates underlined the place of women's rights within it, seeing the role women played in society as not limiting, but qualifying them to engage in public and political life. She reminded the drafting committee that the language must be seen as global, not Western, and that the concept of human rights is not only civil and political, but also economic, social, and cultural. These were the basics: a global roadmap for freedom and equality, detailing that we are all equal before the law. It set a foundation for women's rights, norms, and standards at the international level, and even led to the establishment of the Commission on the Status of Women the next year. And if the world is evolving, shouldn't the law evolve with it? Soon enough, we see examples of the ways in which international law creates a ripple effect in domestic societies. In the Dominican Republic, 3 sisters opposed to dictatorship challenged the regime for their freedom of speech and right to dissent, eventually giving their lives to the cause and toppling authoritarianism. A social worker in rural Sri Lanka championed political rights, education, and family planning for women before being persuaded to enter politics. Within a year, she was appointed the world's first elected female prime minister, overseeing the drafting of a new constitution and the separation of the republic from the British Empire. Just a few years later in Iceland, 90% of women left work, walking out to demonstrate the importance of their contributions to society and protest income inequality. The Icelandic parliament passed a law guaranteeing equal pay the next year. These women activists dovetailed with worldwide momentum, becoming powerful symbols of feminist resistance and social change. Progress started happening in all regions, with countries reforming laws by eliminating job restrictions, prohibiting discrimination and violence, supporting childcare services, and granting the right to be educated and earn an equal wage. These and a whole host of other changes were shaping the legal landscape for women everywhere, starting to close the gap between men and women and benefit the global community. This was also the time of the First World Conference on Women and the United Nations Decade for Women, both of which focused on the policies and issues that disproportionately impact women, including pay equity, gender-based violence, landholding, and other human rights. They established an agenda for women's equality worldwide, giving legitimacy to so-called women's issues on the global stage. Shortly after comes the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, an international treaty that serves as a Bill of Rights for women and that has been ratified by 186 countries. Sadly, the United States is not one of them. Yeah. Still, many domestic achievements were made. This year, for example, we are celebrating 60 years of the Equal Pay Act, which requires that men and women in the same workplace be given equal pay for equal work. It is not perfect, but it is a first step toward abolishing that persistent gender wage gap. The United States also led the way in non-discrimination and access to credit with the Equal Credit Opportunities Act of 1974. This was thanks to the efforts of a female representative, Lindy Boggs, who inserted the terms sex and marital status into the legislation without telling her male colleagues and photocopied the new version herself. She then called them out for their oversight in not including the protected categories. Before her rebellion, it was almost impossible for women to get a loan or credit without their husband's approval. As we move into the 1990s, We even finally get the passage of the Family and Medical Leave Act after years of advocacy from working women who wanted better balance between their work and family responsibilities, something that everyone deserves. The FMLA requires covered employers to provide employees with job-protected, unpaid leave to care for a new child or an ill family member. Elected officials on both sides of the aisle, as well as advocacy groups representing diverse interests, came together to support this common sense legislation. As is so common with compromise, it is not perfect, but more on that later. This era really kickstarted 2 decades of legal reform for increased gender equality. One project measuring women's economic rights found that in the 1990s, 433 reforms were introduced worldwide, followed by 611 reforms in the 2000s. Many economies introduced pioneering new legislation in areas that move beyond basic civil rights, such as non-discrimination in employment and protection of women from domestic violence. And women continued raising their voices and elevating their causes. Rigoberta Menchú publicized the rights of Indigenous women and people in Guatemala, demanding legal action for civil war crimes, and eventually becoming the first Indigenous Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Mary Robinson became the first woman president of Ireland, going on to decriminalize homosexuality, legalize contraception and divorce, and enable women to sit on juries. Finally, at the UN Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing, 30,000 activists from all over the world shared their stories, laying the groundwork for modern organizing. The diversity of the movement was more in focus than ever. Decentralization allowed for attention beyond Western ideas of feminism, and marginalized groups, women of color, women with disabilities, queer women, were more able to not only participate, but influence. Importantly, an all-female team of IT specialists also showed the conference goers how to use computers and get online, sparking digital activism in countries around the globe. Social media emerged as a crucial tool to galvanize populations in the fight against injustice. And as patriarchal systems persisted, more exemplary leaders arose to resist them with these new tools. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf became the first elected woman head of state in Africa, leading Liberia after a brutal civil war, and prioritizing girls' education and women's rights and inclusion in the peace and reconciliation process. The Gulabi gang in India mobilized to stop the scourge of domestic abuse and advocate for harsher penalties for violence. In Morocco, tribal women fought for land rights. In Tunisia, activism propelled gender equality being enshrined in the nation's constitution. And in Lebanon, campaigning led to a controversial rape law being scrapped. A journalist in Yemen and her colleagues protested for freedom of opinion and expression, inadvertently becoming one of the faces of the Arab Spring. Malala Yousafzai marked her first public appearance since being shot to call for girls' education, saying, "Let us pick up our pen and our books. They are our most powerful weapons." Here in the United States, at least 15 states have passed new laws protecting women from sexual harassment, and close to 200 bills have been introduced to strengthen protections against workplace misconduct. The new Pregnant Workers Fairness Act is requiring employers to provide reasonable accommodations to workers' limitations related to pregnancy, childbirth, or other medical conditions. And the PUMP Act provides for reasonable break time for an employee nursing a child. 16 states and Puerto Rico have passed salary history bans, helping to equalize pay between men and women by prohibiting employers from asking about an applicant's prior salary. And since 2011, 10 states have successfully reformed to prohibit early or child marriage, which primarily affects girls, without exceptions. And here we are today, at another watershed moment in the movement for women's rights. Millions of women continue to share their experiences with violence, abuse, and harassment in the Me Too era. An estimated 5 million people worldwide attended a women's march in 2017 in solidarity for women's rights, including in India following the gang rape of a student, across Latin America after a succession of femicides, and in Nigeria following the kidnapping of almost 280 schoolgirls. Women and men advocate for a life free of violence, for a gender equal world, There is so much good news, so much to be proud of. And yet we know from our own lives and from these stories that there is still so much to achieve. What does gender equality look like today? Well, we're not there yet. Over 2.5 billion women and girls around the world are still affected by discriminatory laws and the lack of legal protections, often in multiple ways. The spaces in which laws have been designed and implemented have excluded women. As a result, their voices and perspectives continue to be largely absent from laws and legal practices. Last year, countries around the world adopted the fewest number of legal reforms, increasing gender equality in more than 2 decades. A World Bank report finds that on average, women enjoy only 77% of the legal rights of men. My organization, UN Women, estimates that at this pace, we will not achieve gender equality for another 286 years. Let's look at some numbers. 55 countries limit a woman's freedom of movement, including 14 where she cannot freely leave the home. 43 countries lack legislation addressing sexual harassment at work, and 19 require a husband or guardian's permission to work. In 65 countries, women cannot work in the same industries as men, including in some of the most lucrative jobs. More than 40 countries still differentiate inheritance rights between sons and daughters, or widows and widowers. In over 50 countries, the minimum legal age of marriage is lower for women than for men. Another 50 deny women the equal rights to acquire, change, or retain their nationality, including the ability to confer nationality to a non-national spouse. 28 countries still do not have domestic violence legislation, and 18 exempt perpetrators from prosecution for rape if they marry the survivor. It might seem abstract, but these laws have a real effect on women. In Ghana, a woman in the hospital about to give birth received a call from her employer. She was dismissed from her job as a firefighter because her pregnancy was considered an offense under an old regulation. In Vietnam, an autopsy surgeon was prohibited from continuing at her job after a new decree suddenly labeled it inappropriate for women. An administrative assistant in Egypt was fired after confiding to colleagues that her boss was sexually harassing her, and there is no civil recourse available. A young girl in Iran was told by her father that it would be inappropriate to dream of becoming a judge, something she can never achieve there because it is against the law. And it's not just the existing laws. Here in the United States and abroad, we have seen some of the worst legal setbacks for women's rights in recent history. Crisis is never gender neutral, and the pandemic laid bare the cracks in our foundation, exposing the persistent inequalities that threaten women's lives and livelihoods, especially during difficult moments. Tyrants and anti-democratic forces have attacked women's rights as a political strategy. The US just became one of just 4 countries to roll back reproductive rights in a generation. It is the only developed country in the world that still does not provide paid leave to new parents at the federal level. Nearly 500 anti-LGBTQIA+ bills have been introduced at the state level. And 100 years after the first introduction of the Equal Rights Amendment, the principles of gender equality remain absent from our Constitution. In places like Afghanistan, new decrees have also strangled women's rights, effectively banning girls from continuing on to secondary education and entering the workforce. In Poland, retrogressive laws have obstructed efforts to end gender-based violence. And in China, feminist terms have been banned from online speech to silence women and tighten social control. These laws run contrary to international human rights standards, entrenching gender inequality and preventing progress and prosperity. In moments like this, we must take a hard look at the laws, policies, and norms that govern our societies, how they are implemented, and the ways in which laws and practices enable or hinder the rights of women. Equality in law is crucial to gender equality. Women look to the laws of their state to protect, fulfill, and enforce their rights. Laws that deny them equal rights betray their trust in society and signal that gender discrimination is acceptable, normal, and expected. Moreover, women and girls left behind by discriminatory laws are often permanently excluded from the benefits of development. Countries where there is more legal gender equality have better outcomes, higher female labor force participation, lower vulnerable employment, and greater representation of women in national parliaments. In contrast, lower levels of gender equality in national laws are associated with fewer girls enrolled in primary and secondary school, fewer women in skilled work, fewer women owning land, fewer women accessing financial and health services, and more women facing domestic, family, and sexual violence. McKinsey estimates that gender equality would boost global gross domestic product by an astonishing $28 trillion by 2025. All aspects of the law, constitutional, civil, criminal, labor, administrative, that run counter to gender equality need urgent attention. And let me be clear that gender equality is an inclusive term, and the category of women is not a monolith. It must include women of color, queer and transgender women, non-binary people, and anyone affected by bigotry and intolerance. Repeal or revision of any discriminatory law is imperative, along with the work to enact and put into action laws that enhance existing legal protections and ensure backing by adequate resources more quickly. As Elizabeth Cady Stanton said, there must be no more governing without the consent of the governed. Governments must conduct a gender analysis of all legislation to immediately understand the urgent reforms necessary. They have the power to capacitate politically empowered women and men as leaders, agents of change, and champions of reform. They are ultimately responsible for creating national legal regimes that are consistent with regional and international standards and that protect the rights, safety, and potential of all people. They must establish monitoring systems to ensure that legislative reforms are effectively implemented and can have a significant impact on ending gender inequality. It will require a whole of government approach to enact, implement, and enforce these changes. The donors, philanthropists, entrepreneurs, and leaders of the world also have an essential role to play. The practice of gender equality must be reflected in their lives and organizations. They can amplify positive messages regarding the content of legal reforms, focusing fully on gender equality and a vision of creating opportunities for everyone to achieve their full potential. Their support can capacitate advocates with the financial and technical resources they need to speak out and take action as participants and champions of legislative and policy reforms. They must leverage the power and networks of women and men leaders at all levels, providing what they need to serve as champions and advocates for equality under the law. International organizations are also powerful instruments that can legitimate or constrain the actions of states. They are the provider of political institutions through which states can work together to achieve common objectives. They can collect information and monitor trends, deliver services and aid, and provide forums for settling major disputes. The United Nations, for example, conducts situational analyses as a basis for prioritizing development assistance. It also establishes national monitoring systems and tracks progress over time toward the realization of international goals and commitments, including Sustainable Development Goal 5, achieving gender equality and empowering all women and girls. And finally, civil society, advocates and activists, the people, the most important role of all. An essential source of information of what's happening on the ground in their countries and communities, a monitor of policies and actions, and an institution of accountability for their governments. They engage in advocacy. They distinguish right from wrong. They offer alternative policies for government, the private sector, and other institutions. They provide services, especially to the poor and marginalized. They defend citizens' rights, at the same time working to change and uphold social norms and behaviors. Civil society is the most essential building block of our humanity, providing stability and shaping the foundations of a functioning republic. It must build coalitions. There is strength in numbers, and by coming together in alliances and networks, collective action can transform laws. I've seen it with my own eyes. Women are leaders, caretakers, change makers, and peacekeepers. They are mobilizing to overcome the remaining obstacles to gender equality. They are fighting for an end to gender-based violence, for access to healthcare, for equal pay, and for equal participation in political life. It has not been fast, and it has not been easy. It is not realized by one change, one law, or one person. Instead, people from every corner of society are coming together to achieve it piece by piece. And so the rebellion carries on. Since I've spent so much of my time here telling stories from around the world, let me tell you a few more recent ones. After decades of subjugation to her husband's will, thanks to a discriminatory apartheid-era statute, a woman in South Africa challenged his marital power in court and won. In Costa Rica, the fourth female president of the Legislative Assembly successfully ensured that a woman could freely pursue the job of her choice, eliminating archaic prohibitions on the types of work they can perform. A mother in Indonesia cried tears of joy as a new law on sexual violence was passed, years after she began campaigning on behalf of her daughter, a rape survivor. These stories of resilience and a continuous commitment to gender equality, in even the most difficult of circumstances, are key to building a world in which all women are equal and empowered. Their successes are recent, but they build on the accomplishments of those who have tirelessly worked to remove the legal barriers that hinder our full enjoyment of rights and opportunities. And who are these superwomen? I looked into all of them. Yes, they are first ladies and politicians, but they are also homemakers, social workers, economists, journalists, tailors, writers, lawyers, mathematicians, teachers, and moms. Our heroes are all around us. They are in this room, they are me, and they are you. They simply carried out the revolutionary act of declaring that gender inequality must be made obsolete for this and future generations. How can we carry on the fight for equal rights? None of us can afford to sit back and wait for equality. Only by working together will we achieve the kind of legal and systemic changes needed to fully address discrimination based on gender. We still have the opportunity to eliminate the vestiges of inequality that are lingering in our world. The law is our best agent of change, a tool for social revolution on which the ink is never really dry. I'm so grateful to commemorate the past and the future of the women's rights movement with you. Let us take these stories and lessons, celebrate the progress made, and recommit ourselves to the work still to be done. Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to working alongside you for an equal future. I'll see you at the rebellion. Thank you.